morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome back to the Before I Go podcast. Earlier this week, I had the chance and the privilege of spending some time with a dear friend of mine, one of the most caring persons that I have ever spent time with, and I helped her to clean out her garden shed. And that was a cathartic experience for her. And there's something quite freeing about being able to do a good clean out. So the experience of letting go of something, getting rid of the clutter in our world in the physical sense of form, it's a very freeing experience. And if any of you have done that, if any of you have really just put the time into identifying what it is in your life that is just adding more clutter than freeing you up and getting rid of it, it feels great at the end of it all. And then we start to accumulate more and more things, right, over time. So there's nothing as good as a deep clean. And I was really glad to be able to help her out and restore her shed to a place of opportunity. So one of the cool things about this particular human being is that she has volunteered a fair bit of her time with others in the latter stages of their life, or with families that have just grieved the loss of somebody that was near and dear to them. So she spent a lot of time in hospitals, and also she's learnt so much, just accumulated wisdom from what it is about human beings that occurs in those final stages. And so I asked her about this. I said, what is it that you've come to understand about people who are saying goodbye to this life, or are saying goodbye to somebody that was occupying space and time with them in this life? And she said two things that have stayed with me. The first thing she said is that sometimes in that capacity, when we know a family is grieving for a loved one that's about to go or has just moved on, sometimes all you can do is make a cup of tea for them. And I love that. I love that there are just no words in some moments. Some moments are sacred enough without adding the clutter of words to them, and a cup of tea is worth its weight in gold. So that was one thing that she said that stayed with me. Sometimes all you can do is just offer to make a cup of tea. And then the second thing she said was that it was a really sacred and amazing thing to see people let go in those final stages. And so this is the inspiration for this podcast, and it's going to be quite a lengthy one. So feel free to pause or come back at any stage you need. But yeah, she said it's amazing how people let go, and I won't go into a lot of detail about exactly what she meant by that. But there is a moment that occurs for a lot of human beings when they realize that the material things of this world, whether that is stuff that you can touch with your hands or even some of the thoughts that we've carried, they no longer really matter. And there's a very cathartic process of letting go. So she said it's amazing to bear witness to people letting go of things. So that's what this subject is all about. It's today's letting go. Oh, and there's a lot of material on this, which I'm sure we'll find you, or you'll find it if you need to. So I'm going to share a few bits and pieces today. Now, no matter what culture or background you come from, every culture has some collection of sages or wise people, and they all point to the same thing, which is the importance of letting go. It seems like such an obvious thing to say, but many of us carry additional baggage or weight or a heaviness that just holds us back from living lightly, the way that we were designed to live. So I'm going to share quite a few stories with you today from a number of different sources, and we're going to dance with a whole bunch of different belief systems in the process. So there are some stories from Zen Buddhism, Sufi Muslims, some Christian ideas, spiritual thought leaders. I encourage you to listen to each and hear whatever it is you need to hear. Some stuff may resonate, others may not. It doesn't really matter where your starting point is in all of this. All of the material points in the same direction. So maybe that's one thing you might find, is that the diversity of the things I'm sharing with you today actually all point back in the same place. So I've taken recently to understanding the diversity of people's belief systems and even their thought systems. With the phrase, all the rivers flow back to the same ocean, and there's quite a few gentle people that I've spent time with recently, and they seem to echo that statement. And I found out it's from the Bible, Ecclesiastes 1 verse 7. I looked it up on Google, and this is it. All the rivers run into the sea, yet the sea is not full. Unto the place from whence the rivers come, thither they return again. I love it. All of the rivers flow back to the same ocean. So this is a podcast today inviting you to let go. Perhaps you're going to realize as you listen to what I share that you've been carrying something heavy and you didn't even know it. Or maybe this will just help you to walk a little lighter through life, each to their own. So, as I said, let's get started. No apologies, I'm going to do a fair bit of reading and I'll cite the sources as we go in case you want to get into them yourself. So, let's start with a favourite of mine. Many of you may have heard this, or maybe you haven't. It's a Zen Buddhist story that I love, and it goes by a few different names. But the most commonly used name that I've found, it's called Two Monks and a Woman. So, here we go. Feel free to sit back and just listen, and hopefully I don't put you to sleep as I read some of these extracts. So here's the story about two monks and a woman. A senior monk and a junior monk were travelling together. At one point they came to a river with a strong current. As the monks were preparing to cross the river, they saw a very young and beautiful woman also attempting to cross. The young woman asked if they could help her cross to the other side. The two monks glanced at one another because they had taken vows not to touch a woman. Then, without a word, the older monk picked up the woman, carried her across the river, placed her gently on the other side, and carried on his journey. The younger monk couldn't believe what had just happened. After rejoining his companion, he was speechless, and an hour passed without a word between them. 2 more hours passed, then 3. Finally, the younger monk could not contain himself any longer, and blurted out, "As monks, we are not permitted a woman. How could you then carry that woman on your shoulders?" The older monk looked at him and replied, "Brother, I set her down on the other side of the river. Why are you still carrying her?" I've worked with such a diverse articulation of beings in human form recently, and my personal observations of some of the things that people can get attached to. Some people are attached to anger. Some of us are attached to our stories about ourselves or about somebody else. I know I've certainly held stories in my mind of other people that they aren't real, they aren't accurate. Some of us get stuck and cling to material objects because we think they do something for us, like keep us safe. Some people are really attached to fear, almost like it's an energy source for them. Some people are attached to their thoughts or their beliefs, and other people are attached to their pain. I've seen a lot of people who get a strong sense of identity and almost value by hanging on to their pain. If you'll just listen to my story about my pain and my suffering, then I can grab your attention. Other people get really attached to their plans. Do you know what it's like if things don't go according to plan? How do you respond? What happens? A lot of people, pretty much all of us at some stage, we get attached to our identity. And the last one, which many of you will be familiar with because you've either experienced this yourself or you know people, There are some people who get incredibly attached to being in control. And I think that is one of the funniest ones, because people who need to be in control ultimately are controlled by their need to be in control. So, a little insight that I had that I'll leave you with. What you cling to controls you. What you cling to controls you. There's a book I'm going to read a bit from now. Here it is for those who are watching on YouTube. This is The Inside Out Revolution by Michael Neal, and he actually quotes a story by Robert Cowson in it, and it's about a pilot and the tower. So it's under a chapter called The Kindness of the Design, which you've probably heard me mention before. One of my favourite quotes, or just I guess ideas that Michael Neal has left with us. The kindness of the design. So this is it. I heard a lovely illustration of this idea from Robert Cowson, a teacher and consultant in this approach for many years. He was telling me about a friend of his from high school who was training for his pilot's license. During his first solo flight, he lost control of his Piper Cub trainer plane high above the ground. The more he tried to bring the plane back under his control, the more wildly it span. His conversation with the tower went something like this. Pilot: Mayday, Mayday, I've lost control of the plane. Please advise. Tower: Take your hands and feet off the controls. I repeat, take your hands and feet off the controls. Pilot: Negative, Tower. Repeat, I have lost control of the plane. I'm trying everything I can to bring it back under control, but I just can't do it. This is a matter of life and death. Please, just tell me what to do. The tower responds, This is a matter of life and death. Take your hands and feet off the controls. Do it now. What the young pilot didn't know, and the air traffic controller clearly did, was that trainer planes have a self-righting mechanism built into them. When the pilot lets go of the controls, the plane levels itself out. Once the plane is back on an even keel, the pilot can take over again and steer the plane back to safety, which is exactly what happened in the case of Robert's young friend. So, how does this apply to us? The principle of mind seems to work through us in the direction of health and well-being. It's a sort of spiritual immune system that will bring a return to peace the moment we step out of the way. I wouldn't even think of trying to heal my own cut finger. I needn't try so hard to heal my wounded psyche. The reason so few of us get to experience that power working in our life is that we're so busy trying to fix everything for ourselves. And ironically, like the pilot overworking the controls of a plane designed to right itself, our constant affirmations and interventions often get in the way of our mind's return to clarity and health. We try so hard to remember to live by the wisdom and insight of others that we forget the source of that wisdom is inside us as well. Insights are the natural side effects of living with a relatively quiet mind and a relatively beautiful feeling. Forget the words, stay with the feeling, and the insights will continue to unfold. I know that it can be difficult trying not to fix things when you're convinced that they're broken, and even more difficult when you're convinced that they're getting worse. But in a quieter moment, and we all have our quieter moments, consider the possibility that healthy psychological functioning is the default and your natural state is peace. And if you're willing to take your hands and feet off the controls, you just might find yourself returning to this natural state more and more and more of the time. When you do, you'll know beyond a shadow of a doubt that that place of peace is your psychological and spiritual home. Isn't it a cracker? Take your hands off the controls. It's a matter of life and death. One thing that I also mentioned to a lot of people, particularly those who are very thought-oriented or like to get around the world with the power of their minds and their intellect, is the concept of being invested but not attached. So how can we play full out and know that this is the game of life, but not be so attached to the outcomes? Because when I predetermine the outcome of something and I get attached to it going that way, I start to try and predict the future. And when the future doesn't play out as I thought it was in my head, I get, unhappy, right? So get invested, right? Play, but don't worry so much about the result, right? For the love of the game. Get invested, not attached. There's a beautiful little extract that came across my feed, which I'll put up on, again, YouTube for those of you who are watching, and I'll read it out to you now. It's called The Way of Zen, and there's a little part in this that talks about letting go, which is the theme of today's podcast. But it's broader than that. So again, feel free to listen and take what works for you and leave what doesn't behind. So this is The Way of Zen. Do one thing at a time. Do things slowly and mindfully. Connect deeply with people and nature. Meditate frequently. Appreciate silence. Expect nothing. Be grateful for everything. Observe without judgment. Consume less. Create more. Let go of fears and desires. Listen to understand, not to respond. Be patient and generous. Love deeply. Live simply. Beautiful, isn't it? Let go of fears and desires. I'm now going to read an extract from a book that changed my life, or that came to me when my life was changing. Both, really. So this is called What Matters Most by Brian Draper. And there's a beautiful little extract in this, which is called Let It Go. So I'm just going to read this for you now. Again, listen, just sit back and see what comes to you. So, we may not know what life really has to offer until we manage to let go of what we believe it should offer. And that's not at all easy. The trouble is, we tend to see the act of letting go as an austere, negative process. We are all so used to holding on to things, whether that's to our limiting beliefs or past triumphs or failures, or simply the physical goods we've accumulated on our journey through life, that to release them seems to go quite against our nature. It actually feels threatening and difficult and sometimes dangerous to do so. Yet if we see letting go as an art as much as an act, and if we practice it regularly, we can learn proactively and courageously to create more space in our lives for what matters most. Letting go is an ancient spiritual practice, after all, tried and tested by all the great spiritual leaders. Deep down, we can probably sense that much or even most of what we tend to hoard or hold on to for dear life matters less than we like to believe it does. We spend our lives accumulating things, yet we can't take them with us when we go. And while we may not necessarily feel the need to sell everything and give the money to the poor, as Jesus once advised a rich young ruler, the gesture or orientation of release is nevertheless a powerful way of entering greater personal freedom on a daily basis, to discover more for ourselves of what life beyond our limited expectation holds, and more of what matters most. We may not know what life really has to offer until we manage to let go of what we believe it should offer. And we may not know what freedom tastes like until we manage to release our grip on what is gripping us. Beautiful. if I don't say so myself. All right. As I was preparing for this, apart from thinking of Let It Go from Frozen and asking my girls whether Anna or Elsa sang it, there is a really interesting piece, which is the prospect of let it go versus letting go. And when we think of let it go, I mentioned it up front, things that we tend to cling to don't just have to be material. They can also be thoughts or beliefs or ideas. And so most of us, we invest a whole heap of time and energy into our own self-importance, right? We invest a lot of time and energy into this concept of this thing we think is self. And the self is something that we created. So there's a lot to be learned. It's not to dismiss the importance of each of us and the articulation that we are in this life. But we do. Self-importance is something that we both create and is taught to us. So I'm going to read now apart from a book for you, which is from Eckhart Tolle's A New Earth. And this is from an extract called Lose Yourself to Find Yourself. And again, you'll get a very different feel from this, but it points back to the same direction as everything I've shared so far. So here it is. This is Tolle on Lose Yourself to Find Yourself. Inner space also arises whenever you let go of the need to emphasize your form identity. That need is of the ego. It is not a true need. We have already touched briefly upon this. Whenever you relinquish one of these behavior patterns, inner space emerges. You become more truly yourself. To the ego, it will seem as if you were losing yourself, but the opposite is the case. Jesus already taught that you need to lose yourself to find yourself. Whenever you let go of one of these patterns, you de-emphasize who you are on the level of form, and who you are beyond form emerges more fully. You become less so you can be more. Here are some ways in which people unconsciously try to emphasize their form identity. If you are alert enough, you may be able to detect some of these unconscious patterns within yourself. Here they are: demanding recognition for something you did and getting angry or upset if you didn't get it. Trying to get attention by talking about your problems, the story of your illness, or making a scene. Giving your opinion when nobody has asked for it and it makes no difference to the situation. Being more concerned with how the other person sees you than with the other person. Which is to say, using other people for egoic reflection or as ego enhancers. Trying to make an impression on others through possessions, knowledge, good looks, status, physical strength, and so on. Bringing about temporary ego inflation through angry reaction against something or someone. Taking things personally. Feeling offended. Making yourself right and others wrong through futile mental or verbal complaining. Wanting to be seen or to appear important. Oof, I know I can hit bingo on quite a few of them throughout the years. Once you have detected such a pattern within yourself, I suggest that you conduct an experiment. Find out what it feels like and what happens if you let go of that pattern. Just drop it and see what happens. De-emphasizing who you are on the level of form is another way of generating consciousness. Discover the enormous power that flows through you into the world when you stop emphasizing your form identity. Investing in our own self-importance, huh? Let's keep going. I hope you're getting something out of this. Or I hope you're getting nothing out of this as well. Both would be a win. All right, this is a quote from Brianna Wiest. Yeah, let's go with the latter. It came again through my feed and I saved it because something in it spoke to me. So perhaps something in this will speak to you as well. So this is from Brianna Weist. Your new life is going to cost you your old one. It's going to cost you your comfort zone and your sense of direction. It's going to cost you your relationships and friends. It's going to cost you being liked and understood. But it doesn't matter, because the people who are meant for you are going to meet you on the other side. And you're going to build a new comfort zone around the things that actually move you forward. And instead of liked, you're going to be loved. Instead of understood, you're going to be seen. All you're going to lose is what was built for a person you no longer are. Let it go. There's nothing more imprisoning than clinging to the idea of who we were or our old stories. Let it go. I mentioned Rumi as well, and this is a cracker of a little a list of 12 things. So this is from Rumi, a 13th century enlightened poet and spiritual teacher, was asked, what is spiritual maturity? So I'm going to rattle off now the 12 things that Rumi apparently said were inherent within spiritual maturity. Number 1, spiritual maturity. It's when we stop trying to change others and we focus on changing ourselves. Have you heard that from a few different places before? Number 2, spiritual maturity. It is when we accept people as they are. Number 3, it is when we understand that everyone is correct according to their own perspective. Number 4, it is when we learn to let go. Number 5, it is when we are able to not have expectations in a relationship and we give of ourselves for the pleasure of giving. Number 6, it is when we understand that what we do for our own peace. 7, it's when we stop showing the world how smart we are. 8, it's when we stop seeking approval from others. 9, it's when we stop comparing ourselves to others. 10, it is when we are at peace with ourselves. 11, it is when we are able to distinguish between need and want, and we are able to let go of that want. And finally, number 12, spiritual maturity is gained when we stop attaching happiness to material things. We can't take them where we're going. So a natural question that arises, or has come up at least for me, is, how do you let go? Is it as simple as just letting the brain waves communicate with your fingers to release, unclench? How to let go? There's no definitive answer. You'll find what you're looking for if you do realise you're carrying a heavy burden and it's time to let go. Maybe you'll just call someone up to help you clear out your metaphoric shed. But how to let go? One pointer in the right direction is taken from this book, which is The Wisdom of the Enneagram by Riso and Hudson. It's right at the very back of the book, and I love it now. This is entitled The Stages of the Work, and I'm going to read it for you, and perhaps there's a clue in this around how to let go. So this is The Stages of the Work from Riso and Hudson. If we were to really observe ourselves, we would become aware of our tensions and habits. If we were to become aware of our tensions and habits, we would let go and relax. If we were to let go and relax, we would be aware of sensations. If we were to be aware of sensations, we would receive impressions. If we were to receive impressions, we would awaken to the moment. If we were to awaken to the moment, we would experience reality. If we were to experience reality, we would see that we are not our personality. If we were to see that we are not our personality, we would remember ourselves. If we were to remember ourselves, we would let go of our fear and attachments. If we were to let go of our fear and attachments, we would be touched by God. If we were touched by God, we would seek union with God. If we were to seek union with God, we would will what God wills. If we were to will what God wills, we would be transformed. If we were transformed, the world would be transformed. If the world were transformed, all would return to God. Now, I've spoken plenty in the past about God, and you can call it whatever you want. You go figure that stuff out for yourself. Only you can answer that. But hopefully the words of that don't get in the way, but they also point in the right direction. All right. So I appreciate that I've read a lot to you today, and that I've shared a lot of hopefully inspiring and insightful passages. And I just consider us blessed that enough people, and some of the ones that I've read from, were motivated enough to turn their inspiration into beautiful forms in the form of language and writings, and some in songs and poetry. So for me, when I've sat with this question of how do I let go, I keep coming back to my belief that the answer to how to let go is with every human being, and that one of the simplest gifts that I think holds a lot of answers is the gift of breathing. So I've turned to breath as a guide for how to let go. So if you try and hold on to your breath for long enough, you will naturally realize that the design is benevolent, right? The design is kind enough to you that you can't hold your breath to the point where you'll die. There's a built-in release system, like that story from Michael Neal. There's a built-in control system that, lets you experience the freedom of breathing out again, and then you draw another breath back in automatically. And it's very hard to control our breath. We can do it for a little while, but really we're fortunate enough that breathing is natural. So I look at that as a way of getting a few clues on how to let go. How do I let go of things? Well, I turn to my breath, and I just remember that the person that's clinging onto the stuff is not who I really am. So I would say this: how do we let go? Just remember that breath is given, and it's not taken or commanded. The programming is laced with grace. And I think of all the things that I've taken for granted over the years. And I suffered from a pretty chronic asthma when I was a kid, and was hospitalised a few times, taken into emergency. And I've been with a few people recently, and many of you might have known some throughout the impacts of, or the deeper impacts of COVID being seen, people who were strained for breath. And if you've ever been short of breath, winded, or gone through some sort of sickness, man, suddenly we become really grateful for just the simple gift of breathing. So this is it. We do it in and out 22,000 times a day. And yet we pay a lot of attention as human beings to first and last breath, don't we? The birth and the death of people. But if I can just look at this current moment and just pay attention to first and last breath, just one in and one out, and be grateful for that, that seems to help a fair bit. And so letting go can be as simple as just acknowledging the gift that is being breathed. The breath of life, hey? That's what they call it. All right, so I want to finish with a poem from Rumi. So it's in this huge book, which is The Essential Rumi. and it's entitled Only Breath. So perhaps this can be a little pointer for those of you who might have figured out there's something about you, something you're clinging to, a thing or a belief or whatever you want to say it. If there's something you want to let go of, perhaps you'll be able to find an invitation in this. So this is Only Breath by Rumi. Not Christian or Jew or Muslim, not Hindu, Buddhist, Sufi or Zen, not any religion or cultural system. I am not from the east or the west, not out of the ocean or up from the ground, not natural or ethereal, not composed of elements at all. I do not exist, am not an entity in this world or the next, did not descend from Adam and Eve or any origin story. My place is placeless, a trace of the traceless, neither body or soul. I belong to the beloved, have seen the two worlds as one, and that one call to and know, first, last, outer, inner, only that breath breathing human being. If you ever need to remember how to let go of something, be still. Follow your breath. Letting go is the most natural phenomena. It's a blessing for each of us while we are fortunate enough to be breathed. All right, blessings to you. I really mean that, and much love to you as well. So much love. Thanks for listening, and I hope you heard what it was you came here to hear. I'll see you soon. Thanks so much for listening and sharing this space with me. I really hope this has served you well, and it continues to do so for years to come. I love helping others, so if you would like to experience the power of creating together, please reach out to me. I'm here to help. And if you want to be on the podcast and leave a legacy, check out the contact details on my website, lyndenrochford.com, or you can find me on Facebook. I'd love to hear your story before I go. Wishing you so much love from the inside out. I'll see you soon.